Stewart, and I'm hosting this chat today. Thanks very much for coming out. It's great to see some people in a place. Thank you. Tim and Rob, do you want to tell us a bit about this? It's your second sort of film on this theme, isn't it, really? And explain a little bit about how it came about.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, it's like, I don't know, we sort of ended up making films about folk music somehow, and it's probably Tim's fault, because he's from a Morris dancing village in Oxfordshire, and we kind of accidentally made a film about a trip that the people from that village made to the Somme to find their ancestors who'd died in the First World War, and that was
10 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
This year, in fact.
Yeah, Tim's made a film called Way of the Morris about tracing the Morris dancing traditions of a village in Oxfordshire. I suppose you've made a trilogy now, haven't you? You've made a trilogy of films, and then out of that came the pair of them doing a documentary about the folk singer Shirley Collins, who was on this trip with Alan Lomax in the 50s to research and discover all this music for Lomax's research, and then that's not only did that sort of inspire Shirley to start singing again, but in the act of screening that film around the States, what came first? The idea that you would do the screening tour, or that you would also make it into a documentary about going back to the places that were covered in the original trip?
It was kind of probably a kind of two-pronged thing, really, in that when we started making the Ballad of Shirley Collins, Shirley wasn't singing and hadn't sung for 30 plus years, and there seemed to be no indication she was going to start singing again. So we started making a film about a singer who didn't sing, and we knew about this part of her life when she'd gone with Lomax, who was her then lover. She was a much younger woman, and they collected these amazing songs. So originally I think we thought that strand of the story would be more prevalent in the Shirley film, but then as we were making that film, Shirley started to sing again, and so that kind of took over, and it became a film about a singer who didn't sing singing again.
Right.
And so in a way this took a bit of a back seat to that story. But then when we were showing the Shirley film in the US, Rob in fact did an amazing job of trying to book us gigs where we knew they had been in 1959 collecting music, really as a kind of marketing way of saying, hey look, we've got this film about your town a little bit, because there's some music in it from here. And then it just kind of became almost obvious in a way that if we were going to be there anyway, which we've been asked to do Q&As a bit like this after the screenings, so God knows what this might spawn. We thought, well, if we're going to be there on the ground anyway, why don't we take a camera and, make a
something you could make a fourth film about screenings of this film. But it's different.
I'm already thinking what that could be, yeah.
It's different to the other two, though, because the other two had a story to tell. And this film, it's very different to the other two films that you've been involved with that are to do with folk music. It feels to me that you started off with an idea, and somehow it's changed in the making. And it's become different to the other two films in that it doesn't tell a story. It's ended up as a sort of like a poem in sound and words of images of people, memory and tradition and landscape against the backdrop of the tumult of American politics today. And I should imagine that it's very different to the original brief you wrote for it. It felt like, because you were a mobile little unit of 3 people, you were able to let the film become something else to the original proposal. Would that be right?
Can you write that down afterwards? That's more or less. Yeah. No. I mean, this was like. This film cost like nothing. I mean, it really was. We didn't have anyone telling us you have to do this. We didn't write a brief for this film. We just thought, we're going to America. Let's take a camera. Why wouldn't you? And we knew we were going into all these places. And we always talk about this, because we always say this when we do talks about it, about how, the this trip took a backseat in the Ballad of Shirley Collins. But that film, actually, about a quarter of that film, and most of the budget of that film, was spent on recreating this trip. We shot faux archive of the 1959 trip in Sussex, pretending that, using the photos that you see in this film, kind of thing. So actually, we've really spent a lot of the time doing filmmaking about this trip. But this is sort of almost the opposite of that. It was like, let's not dwell too much on the past. Let's look for like the echoes of it in the present. Yeah, kind of thing.
Well, there seem to be two things going on. One are where you go to a place and it hasn't changed much, and there are people living in the house that are related to the people who were recorded there in the 50s. And then you get things like that Mexican guy, where it's completely different, but it's sort of telling a story about people on the move, immigration, cultures going to different places, which does reflect the subject of Lomax and Shirley Collins' initial research, but they're two different ways of coming at the same thing. And it did make me think, this idea that when you try to get funding for something, you have to give in a brief and tell them what it is you're going to make. And years ago I was working with a theatre guy called Julian Crouch, and he was very resistant to the brief, because he said that you often don't know what you're going to make until you've started making it. And then he would give in models of sets, for example, that he knew had no relationship to what he was actually going to do, just to get the funding people off his back, to give them something. And he'd say, well, I won't know what it is until we start doing it. And this film feels like you can sort of feel it taking shape, and you suddenly realise that it is against the backdrop of these midterm elections, and you start... In the edit, were you looking for the... did you start to foreground the political discussions because they felt relevant, or was it all in there anyway?
I mean, I think the way the film's ended up coming out the way it has is because when we... and this is just complete chance. When the Shirley film was about to tour the States, we just realised, I think, at some point, hang on, that's when the midterm elections will be. So we were literally there on the election day. So it was kind of impossible not to talk about it. And because we were from outside as well, people were very ready to talk to us about it, because I think they felt, people were perceiving America from the outside in a different way than they had recently. So that it was all just there in the air, and we actually couldn't avoid it. It was very much what we encountered, and so we just kind of allowed ourselves to. We tried to be very non-judgmental about what we encountered, and just kind of soak it up and just roll the camera and really see what we got. We didn't really have. Every day was a new day. What will we get today? We never really knew what we were going to get on any given day.
Did you find that they were? Did you find that the people you encountered were perhaps more accommodating and open with you because you were English? There's two examples of that are, one, Lomax. Shirley has talked about how Lomax felt she was his secret weapon because she wasn't white American, and so there wasn't a hostility to her, and all, from some of the subjects. And also she was from another country, so it was interesting to them. And Bernard McMahon, who made that long series about the blues and American folk music for American telly, American classic, he's a very sort of, he looks like someone who would have been an English ambassador to somewhere. He's a very smartly dressed, well-spoken man. And I think when he was going around trying to find all these old blues records, people were totally disarmed by it, as if a sort of official from Her Majesty's government had arrived to get stuff off them. Was it useful being outsiders in that way?
I think it really was. I mean, so 2018, we were still like, Brexit was still a really big thing. I think that was in our heads as well when we were there. It's almost making a film about Brexit, but in America, somehow, And if we'd gone in as two members of the Liberal Metropolitan Elite, and we'd gone out to make a film about Brexit here,
yeah.
We would have encountered real problems. Well, an American could have come over here and made that film, and it would have been fine. And I think the same. And also it's that thing of going. We weren't going there to make a film about politics. We were going there to make a film about music. you know. And our first questions to people were, do you know anyone who remembers this guy? And show someone a picture, and then, you know, someone on the street would go, oh yeah, they live over there, and you know. And so that then immediately people aren't thinking you're coming to judge them, and to, you know.
I did wonder about that. I was tangentially involved on the fringes of your Shirley Collins project from, I think, about 2013, and I know how closely you live with the subject material and listening to all those old tapes and recordings. And I remember there was a time when I was interviewing Shirley for another one of these sorts of events, and we were sitting on stage listening to a recording of Freddie McDowell, and I suddenly realised that Fred McDowell, and I suddenly realised that it was a recording she'd made, and she was sitting there listening to it from 60 years ago, and she had pressed the buttons on the tape recording. That was a very disorientating feeling, that almost like travelling through time talking to someone, and you're going back to these places, you're going to these places for the first time and meeting the relatives of people that you must have spent hours in the edit suite poring over the original source material. Was that a disorientating experience?
Well, I mean, going to that house where Jorge, the Mexican guy, was, and having seen all those photos and listened to those recordings for hours and hours, and it was like, you know, it's a proper, like, you know, generations of white pioneer folk having lived there, and seeing that porch and having the pictures of those guys who, like, are pretty intimidating looking in my head when we were there. That was probably the weirdest moment in that way, you know. But yeah, I mean, constantly it was like, and then just random things like the guy Jimmy Edmonds, the fiddle player who plays that beautiful fiddle song. We were just in there. Someone had just sent us there. So
yeah, I don't remember how we ended up there. Somebody just recommended that you should. His shop is on the way out of town, so maybe call in there on it. Well, that was literally, we were on our way to the next screening. We thought we got time to stop off at this guy's guitar making shop. I wonder if he's in. We hadn't even called him. We just literally knocked on his door, and I think maybe that kind of helped.
I mean,
in a way, the English said, "Oh, terribly sorry to bother you. Can you come with a camera and film?"
Well, that's the beauty of this sort of low-impact filmmaking. Since I last met you, I've been involved in a project like that myself, and certainly lots of the things that ended up being the best bits of the film were complete accidents, which if we'd actually had a budget, we'd have had to plan our days out better, and we wouldn't have been able to. We'd have had to justify what we were doing. But actually, you can just go off on there seems to be a thing in that where, when you get to the Mississippi Fred McDowell part of the story, it does seem to go up a gear somehow. Because when you hear that music, you can hear its global influence, and it suddenly seems to expand beyond that. You're going, oh, that's interesting, because that sounds like Scottish folk music, and that's there, and then suddenly you've got the roots of popular 20th century and late 20th century popular culture is just coming there. It's incredible seeing the grave. I still feel naive about things like this, that I always imagine that it would be special in some way, that someone would have made a big deal about it, but it's just there.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of Mississippi, that going there was just, I still, you know, it's a segregated town, and it's still a segregated town. There's a railway. White people live on one side, black people live on another side. White people go to this school, black people go to that school. You know, it's. You know, and sort of, so, and it was before all of, you know, I mean, it was after all the Ferguson stuff at the end of Obama, but it was before all the current Black Lives Matter stuff kind of thing. And it's just sort of, now watching it, it's so weird, because it's sort of making a film about that, but before it was happening, almost. So I find it really weird watching the Mississippi section for that reason. But all of that is in there, you know, and you know, and it is definitely, you know, I think the white sections of the film, we were really wanting to just basically go, look, it's not, we have a stereotype of the South that is not true, you know. If, like, you look at the stats from the Republican states, and 54% of people vote Republican. But a lot of that is because people are not allowed to vote for all sorts of complicated reasons Americans find to make poor people not allowed to vote. A lot of that is people not voting at all. You know, and also if you live in an area where you've got a very large proportion of people that support Trump or whatever, you know, or kind of like the far-right Christian values or whatever, the other people really know about it and they really understand it and they know what's wrong with it in a way. If you don't live there, you don't. You know, so that was sort of the focus with the white section, but with the black section, it was it was, yeah, you know, it was much more, yeah, you know, the MC Hammer quote anecdote is kind of trivial in a way, but it's in there for a reason, because, yeah, you know, the roots of, like, the problems in America, but also the influence of America are all in that poorest part of the country, you know, which is, I think, what's really, you know, fascinating about it.
Are you, having done that, are you tempted to look at, again in the Shirley film, there's a lot of material about her learning songs from English traditional singers and gypsies and of the BBC people that went doing a similar kind of song collecting field recordings to Alan Lomax, but in Suffolk. You know, are you tempted to do a journey around England, looking at where the source material for our songs were? Because I think weirdly it would have changed much more than Southern America.
Well, I think we've both been really fascinated by what we've learned in the last 10 years of making these films about this notion of these songs that went across with the pioneers and were kind of preserved in the Appalachians when they died out back here, and then various people, you know, and Shirley was part of this idea of trying to repatriate some of those songs, and there's a couple of songs on Shirley's previous album which were songs that she remembers hearing in America but were originally British tunes that had kind of stopped being sung here. So, I mean, it's interesting, that kind of idea though of making a film about it, because I think even though it's a film, this is a film without any kind of real plot, what it does have, and I think we always had this in the back of our heads, is we're going to America and it's a road movie, and road movies work in America because you just kind of, that's a concept that we can get behind. Like, we can at least pin it around some people in a car driving from one place to another and somewhere else.
And actually, you instantly, as a viewer, you instantly know where you are. You go, oh, there's the sky, there's the road, this will be good.
Yeah, exactly. Well, look, there's some signs, it says things like, well, it might have some stars and stripes on it. Oh, look, there's a kind of a diner that looks a bit exotic. Whereas, you know, once you translate that idea to
chef.
It's not quite so. So you'd lose that. I think you'd lose that magic. You'll have to find some other way of kind of fulfilling that side of the bargain if you were going to do it in this country.
But I mean, we do have several of those written down somewhere.
Right.
You know, they're not top of you know, broadcast commissioners' agendas, though.
No, well, you've got to do your own thing now. And I've sort of realised that recently, that we have to try and find ways around it, because that sort of patriarchal system of we will go to the BBC and see if they'll give us some money to make an interesting film doesn't exist anymore. You know, so we have to find a way around it. That's certainly done it. I'm going to take questions now, because I know that everyone's sitting there in their masks, slightly hallucinating, like I wasn't there from breathing in your own foul internal gases. So let's we'll take some questions quickly, and if I can hear them. In fact, does anyone like to ask anything? Yes, sir.
I really enjoyed your film. I've not seen any of your previous films. I will go back and watch the others. I was really interested in, when you went to Kentucky, you spoke to people, how self-aware people were of the perception of them outside of their community, this sense that they were all Trump supporters. And I just wondered how strong that was, how prevalent that was, and how much you felt this musical journey was important in terms of re-establishing a different perception of what those people feel and are and support. Because for me, this is kind of watching something that is kind of outside of my North London bubble, you know, that I'm not particularly aware of. And I just kind of wondered how we would feel, you know, if you did that sort of story around here, would that feel different?
So it's a question about you know, how deliberate was your attempt to change the perception of the stereotype of people in Kentucky, and also about how aware those people were themselves of having to confront what they imagined your perception of them might be.
I mean, I think the music was always our secret weapon, I think, with that. I mean, you could go to those places in Kentucky and try and find the people who were aware of their perception on one level, and on the other level wanting to kind of confront it. But you might not find them, But because we were kind of going in search of people who were connected to the music, I think that, I mean, that obviously kind of impacted on who we actually spoke to. I mean, if we'd have just turned up in the centre of town and gone into a diner and spoken to somebody, you might not have got somebody who was quite so self-aware and willing to confront it. But because they were people who were connected to the music, I think, and the first, there's that guy who references Woody Guthrie like that, as if, you know, to us it's like, oh great, he knows Woody Guthrie, but I think if you go down the road into the town where he lives, most people wouldn't know who Woody Guthrie was. So, I mean, we were lucky in that respect that we were talking to the kind of people who were probably going to allow us to get beneath the skin, but it was definitely what we were trying to do, to kind of, you know, present, you know, I think, certainly for myself, you know, if you see somebody who's going to speak like that, you know, you got a certain way you think they're going to think, and they're going to respond to your questions and what they're going to vote for. What I love about it is, you know, he opens his mouth and he sounds like you expect him to sound, but what he says ain't what you think he's going to say. You know, and that was, I mean, that was powerful for us on that. That was our first day of filming that day. And I think from that moment we knew this is a really interesting way to try and take this, to try and present something on the surface which we can try and you know, short circuit, if you like, or get beyond the stereotype. But again, I think with any documentary, you know, you're only as good as the people you end up talking to on one level, or what they're prepared to give to you.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's the whole point of a film like this. It's not about you. It's not about us. It's about what we... And that first scene in the Gladden household in Virginia is a perfect example. Like, so that same guy that Tim just mentioned, during the Vietnam protests in Kent State University, there's a really famous photo of a protester throwing a petrol bomb at police lines. That's him. That's that guy. That's him. You know, and like sort of the way, you know, but the way that we made this film, we just couldn't get that in, because we just said, if you've got that photo here, you can tell. We couldn't then like put a caption up or something like that. You know, that just had to kind of fall by the wayside, which was like, that was the nature of the filmmaking thing. But just that family, you know, that family was like a Civil War family. Half of them Republican, half of them Democrat. The Democrat half are like rabid. They're not Democrats. They're like proper. You know, they're proper left-wing communist Americans, you know. And so, you know, there's a microcosm of it all there, but yet they sort of all got on still, you know, despite all of that, you know, because family was so strong. So it was just, you know, that really set the template, I think, you know, and it was a privilege.
Anyone else? Yes.
I thought there was some fantastic. A lot of the black and white stills were wonderful. Were they from the Lomax tour, and who took them, or were they?
Where did you source all the black and white stills from?
Yeah, they're all from the Lomax archive, and there's quite a lot of colour ones in there as well. They're predominantly black and white, and Lomax took most of them, but Shirley Collins took a certain number as well. She doesn't really remember taking too many photos, does she? Is my memory, but there's some that she clearly did take, because some of them are of Alan Lomax, and it was before, you know, people did selfies, so she must have taken that one at least.
Yeah, there's a few that she's quite cross that she aren't ascribed to her, I think, actually, I seem to remember.
Yeah, it's funny you talking about that again, having lived on the fringe of this story I first met Shirley going on 20 years ago, and it's interesting now, she's written a book about it, you've made the film about her, you've made this film, and there's Lomax's book, which she contradicts quite a lot of herself. It's becoming one of those, and then these people that you've interviewed remember it differently, or not at all, in some cases. It's interesting seeing this journey that obviously released all this music out into the wild and changed the way that folk music and blues music and pop music by association was made for the rest of, you know, from that point on. It's sort of differently remembered by different people. I like the uncertain history aspect of it.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because there was one of the Como mamas in the Mississippi section. She talked about being 8 years old when Lomax came. And we talked to her, didn't we, specifically about, and do you remember there was a white English woman with him as well, called Shirley Collins, and she's like, I don't remember her at all. So I know she was definitely She was definitely there, but she, for whatever reason, had kind of... You'd think she'd remember that, but I guess maybe she was so kind of fixated on Lomax being Lomax. I don't know. She didn't really notice he was pressing the buttons to record it. But yeah, so her memory is that there was nobody called Shirley Collins in the building. So yeah, maybe it was all a big elaborate lie. We don't know.
Anyone? Yeah.
You said that the way the film came together thematically was almost incidental in making it, but the time of year seems to play a big part in the tone of it. Was that more?
Again,
Can you summarise what that was? That question, because just for
basically about whether. Oh, sorry, you do that. You're much better at that.
I can hear.
Oh, okay. About whether the time of year was an important component in the film, and again, I mean, it became it. But again, I think I've been to New York, but never having been to like rural America in the fall, I had no idea that. I mean, it's just.
Yeah, it's really great the way that the buildings and the quite the depressing poverty of some of it is offset against this incredible play of the colour of the leaves and everything. I mean, you couldn't have art directed it better if you'd had a budget.
And we talk about America as like a place that's destroying its natural resources and whatever. But I mean, we don't have any nature here anymore. I mean, we really don't. It's like there's more nature in like one park in rural Virginia than there is in the whole of the UK. So it's sort of, it's quite also a bit humbling in a way. It's like, we go around preaching at Brazil and America and Canada and wherever about destroying their natural resources. But, if we're going to take that approach as Europeans, we need to look at the fact that we have basically become the predominant culture in the world by destroying ours and then destroying everybody else's, And so there's just like, I'm not saying that comes across in the film, but I think just showing America is just the most. I mean, it's just incredible at this time of year. It's the same, and it's this time of year again now. There's nothing like it.
I mean, that was something that did dawn on us again when we were getting ready to go. It was like, hang on, the scenery is going to be spectacular. That will be in our favour as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's on many levels, I think, quite an ugly film. It's not beautifully shot for the most part, but the scenery, which, again, nothing to do with us, the kind of God's art direction was in our favour, yeah.
Anyone? Yes.
I was wondering what was behind the dedication then? Was it to Peter Fonda?
So yeah, the film is dedicated to Peter Fonda. The reason for that is while we were editing, Peter Fonda died, and there's the sequence towards the beginning of the film where Jim, one of the Gladden cousins, has got his Peter Fonda Easy Rider badge on. So it was a kind of call back to that moment, really.
I met Peter Fonda about 20 years ago. Yeah, I'll just tell you this. It's irrelevant to this, but it's a funny story. About in the 90s, I wrote a film, not a film with a script, and I tried to get it made, and I kept being sent backwards and forwards to America where there were people that wanted to fund it, and they used to put me up in the Four Seasons Hotel, and they'd pay for it in Hollywood, but I couldn't afford to eat anything there or drink anything, so in the end, I used to go and stay in a Motel 6 in Santa Monica, and but I got to the point where I had lined up to be in it. I had Peter Fonda, Alan Rickman, and Daryl Hannah, but the impossibility of dealing with American producers and funding just hit my head in the end. But anyway, I met Peter Fonda, and I said I went for a meeting with him, and he agreed to do this part. And I said, "How are you?" And he said, I'm all right, but I'm just sick of talking about Easy Rider all the time. There's a Easy Rider press junket, and I'm just fed up of talking about Easy Rider. I thought, well, I won't ask about that. And the problem was, anything I did ask him about, he used an anecdote from Easy Rider to illustrate. Then I was trying to ask him things. He just agreed to do the film at the start of the meeting, and then just like telling. He told you all the stories you would want to know from Peter Fonda. He said that he was there on acid with the Beatles. And he said something like, I know what it's like to be dead. And John Lennon went, oh, that's a good line for a song, I'll put that in a song. And that became I know what it's like to, she said, right, yeah, by the Beatles. And then he said to me, you know, it's a very unusual song that. He said, it's very hard to play, no one's ever covered it. And I said, oh, they have. The Walking Seeds from Liverpool have covered it, for example. And he went, no one's ever covered it. He obviously wasn't used to anyone disagreeing with it. But I hadn't noticed that was dedicated to him. But now, everyone that I had lined up was dead for that film, so it shows how long it takes to get a film made, given up on it. So, no, fine, easy. Well, he would have recognised something of the restless spirit of traversing America in that film. I mean, Easy Rider's a different kind of road film, isn't it? But it is a road film in the same way as that is. It's visiting people along the route in a picaresque sort of fashion. And that does sit, as much as anything else, within a tradition of road movies, doesn't it? But a sort of lo-fi version of the road movie. Yeah.
So that's a very, very comprehensive answer to your query.
What did you decided that a film was a road movie this week that you'd rewatched, which has a connection to this film?
The film I decided. Oh yeah. Oh Brother Where Art Thou? You know, which is obviously so the soundtrack. Another kind of reason that this music from this trip is famous is because it basically inspired the soundtrack to Our Brother Where Art Thou, the Coen Brothers film. And there's lots of lovely stories connected with that film about them tracking down people. So they use a song that they recorded in Parchment Farm, which is a massive state prison in Mississippi. And then they had to track down the guy that sang it in 1959 to give him a check, royalty,
For hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars, exactly, and then it just sort of struck me that actually, we don't, in my head that film isn't a road movie, but it actually is, and in fact, it's probably the ultimate road movie in a way, because it's based on the original road movie, which is also the original piece of literature ever written, which is the Odyssey. So it's, and they didn't even have roads or movies back then, so anyway.
That was just an argument that me and Rob had over email earlier this week about whether it was a road movie or not, and I thought it would be really interesting to try and weave that into the answer to that question.
I think it is a road
So be careful what we email about in future.
I think we'll take one more question if anyone's got anything. Have you got a question up there, or are you waving? Oh yeah, right. You'll have to bellow it out.
How much were you helped by the t-shirt of the pagan lady that said, I totally agree with myself?
What was the question?
How much help were we given by the pagan lady's wearing a t-shirt which says, I totally agree with myself?
How much help were you given?
How much was...
Did that help you?
Did it help?
Did you put it on purpose?
I'm not sure. It'd be interesting to know if anybody wore their best for us, or thought about what they were going to wear. I would say probably no, because as we intimated earlier, a lot of people didn't know we were even coming. We just turned up with a camera.
Yeah, or who you were. Like that man being interviewed in the radio station. He didn't have any idea what's going on. So he had no reason to be guarded, because he didn't really appreciate who he was talking to anyway.
It's just some English guys with a camera again.
I mean, I love that t-shirt. I absolutely love that t-shirt. I think it's brilliant. I'm so glad she's in the film as well, because that then opened up the whole devil story that Texas Gladden recounts, and also one of her most famous songs is The Devil's Nine Questions, and then here's her great-granddaughter, who's now a pagan, and she's kind of almost got the most important line in the film to me, like right at the end. It comes back to her, and they're talking about how the United States is not the United States, and she says that it's just not right. It's not right how things are at the moment. And then she sort of realises she's stating an opinion, and then she says, "But who am I?" Which, probably being a little bit pretentious, but that, the voices in this film are not voices of people who are privileged in being allowed to communicate their thoughts in our society, and that for me is the thing that I'm sort of proudest of about it.
What will happen to it now? I mean, it's an interesting question to ask at the moment, because it's difficult to screen things, Lots of things are on hold. It's difficult to sell things in a physical copy because shops are intermittently, we don't really know what's going on. What happens to a film like this now, after today?
Well, it's going to be on Sky, so that's something.
On Sky Art.
Which is a fucking just like...
Which is now free to air, so you can watch it without giving any money to Warner, which is good, yeah.
Which is, I think, in a way why we thought, right, well let's just, it's going to be on Sky next year, let's just release it, And I think, I don't know why Sky have bought this film. It's probably the least likely film I thought would ever be on any sort of TV
you know what,
station ever.
I've been watching Sky, because they bought this film that we did as well, and I felt much the same, but I've been watching it lately, and it seems like my son's 13, and yesterday we were watching a really amazing 12-hour long piece of devised drama on Sky Arts, which was shot in one take from 9:30 yesterday morning live until 9:30 at night. And then on the way home last night we listened to 3 hours of selections from the BBC Radiophonic Workshop on Radio 4 Extra from the 1960s and 70s. And back then there was a government-funded unit to research abstract sound, right? The Radiophonic Workshop. If that was happening today, Jacob Rees-Mogg would be in Parliament playing tapes of a key being dragged along a brick and saying how disgusting that the public funded that. And it seems like what is weirdly happening, it's almost like a medieval patron thing, is that massive companies like HBO and Sky can find a tiny part of their budget to give them the credibility of putting art onto television, whereas it's much harder for a public-funded broadcaster to do that because their budget's been cut, and because any attempt to do so is discredited as part of a manufactured culture war by the right-wing press. So I think that it's really weird, everything's up to play for, although I'm also aware that is completely manufactured self-justification because I've just allowed Sky to have something that I've worked on. But we are in a state of absolute flux about who are the good guys now when it comes to distribution of things, to funding them, and all the certainties we had before have finally exploded, particularly by the fact that public broadcasting here is now written about in such a way as it's discredited it within the first sentence. One of them they talk about holding the BBC to account, and yet there was a time when that's exactly the sort of film it would have funded. So I don't think any of us know what is going on now, and we wait to find out. And and it's the survival of independent cinema like this, for example, is part of the same question in the post-COVID economy. Yeah.
I mean, the closest parallel that we've come across to this film is a film from 1983 by a Belfast documentarian called John T. Davis, who basically drove down Route 66, just meeting people, and made a film about that experience, and that was a BBC and BFI commission from 1983.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's this film is not a film that would have...
I think what you come away with though from it is a feeling that a load of people interviewed for fairly random reasons are basically all right. Which is a really encouraging thing about humanity. There's a film it made me think of that I saw recently, Elstree 76, which is a strung together load of interviews with people who were extras in Star Wars. And they've just all got stories to tell about their lives that aren't that much to do with having a green face in 1976 or whatever. But they're just a kind of it's a good way of hanging all those stories together of those people. For anyone who's not aware of Rob and Tim's work, Tim's first documentary was The Way of the Morris, which is about how the Morris dancing tradition was revived. It's a great film. And together they made the Ballad of Shirley Collins, about Shirley Collins' research trip with Lomax, about her becoming a folk singer, about her losing the confidence to sing, and then getting it back, bizarrely, partly as a result of the interest in the process of making your film generated. The weird case of the act of watching something actually changing its own story. And then this film, which has come off the back of that, and they seem to be developing into a theme. It's interesting to see what the next one will be.
There's a couple of short films as well. One about the kind of slightly mythical Suffolk, Norfolk folk tradition of dwyle flonking, which is actually quite a pure example of a field recording. That's what we felt when we were making it. We basically stumbled upon this old guy who runs a fruit and veg stall out of a shed in his back garden. And we basically put a microphone on him. Again, didn't turn up to talk to this guy, we just happened upon him, put a microphone on him, and he spoke to us for an hour about stuff, some of it to do with dwyle flonking, but most of it not to do with dwyle flonking. So there's that film as well, which has kind of got a folky feel. And then actually on this trip, we also made a short film about, a shortish film, 40-minute film about an Appalachian poet called Morris Manning. That's online, isn't it, that one?
I think so, yeah.
On the lush.
Everything's online now, isn't it?
But yeah, I hope this film gets something. We were meant to be in America now, touring this film.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where the next film would have been being made. But we're not. So I think, you know, I'd love to show this film in America because it's a very similar thing. You know, you show this film in New York, it's outside of everybody's experience, you know, as much as here, if not more than here, you know. And so I think in that way it's really important. And the only place that I'd seen it before this release was in Virginia, where they did a screening of a unfinished copy, and it was pretty amazing to watch it with, you know, people are just like, oh, okay, yeah, so this is like actually what it's like here. You know, not because we did anything, just because we just filmed it and put what came out of the camera on the screen, you know. So yeah, I hope something happens over there.
Before we go, who was your third crew member? There was 3 of you on the road.
Damien, yeah.
Yeah, so our cameraman who also recorded all the sound is a chap called Damien, and I mean he was quite interesting to have along as well. I think that ties into what you just said, because Damien is from New York. And he came down to us from New York to come on the trip with us. So he was experiencing his own country, but he had never been.
Yeah.
And it was kind of always continually surprised that we seemed to know more about it than he did, because obviously we'd done the research through the archives.
A decade.
So yeah, I mean, that was interesting to witness it through his eyes as well. It was a bit of an eye-opener for him, wasn't it?
And he was just, I mean, you've got to be careful when you do, like, you know, 3 weeks in a car.
Yeah.
With, you know, we were literally, I mean, it was insane, to be honest. It was like, we'd get up in the morning from whatever motel we were staying in, drive around trying to find people to film, and then have to stop in time to drive 4 hours to the next town where we had to do a Q&A that night, and then find our hotel, get a bit of sleep, and then do the same thing again the next day, you know. So, and he was, you know, he was very personable as well as very competent, you know, and so it worked really well. It was a brilliant trip.
Well, I think you can see in that the benefits of having a little mobile unit that meant you could follow whatever caught your eye. It was a really great piece of work. I think we can wrap it up probably there, but thanks for everyone for coming out. And I don't know about you, but it's been good, you know, seeing some people. Really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed coming out, watching a film in a place, and I hope we're able to do it all again soon in the future. For Tim Plester and Rob Curry, and thanks to